All right, welcome back everyone. Last I left you, we had primered the skateboards in the spray booth, and you saw I had 6 of them hanging up. I really just want to focus on one of them. All the others have been sanded. They're ready for paint. I just wanted to focus in on this one, kind of walk you through the process of what happens after it's primed. So I'll go over a little bit of abrasives, a little bit of prep here, but I want to talk about the primer first. What is primer used for? Why do we have it? A couple reasons. First, primer is used for adhesion. Paint typically by itself doesn't like to stick to metal, plastics and stuff like that on its own. So you need something in between the substrate and the paint to get everything to adhere properly. Primer is typically what's used, sometimes a sealer. All right, we use a lot of primers. All right. The other thing that primer is used for is leveling out the surface. Typically, and on this one, I left this one, it's got some problem spots. I don't know if you can see them in the camera. It's got some wood grain showing, a little bit of like tear out from probably the manufacturing process. As we sand these, we'll be able to see those, and I'm going to show you how to fix stuff like that. So depending on how thick you put the primer on, it'll only fill up so much, right? And I'll show you a way to fill up the deeper stuff also. But basically what we're trying to do is put on a few coats. I think we put 3 coats on these of primer. We're going to start surfacing. We're just going to start leveling out the surface to get it as smooth as possible. Now remember, a paint job is only as good as what you've prepped it for, okay? The more time you spend in prep, the better your paint job typically will come out. The painting portion of actually going in and spraying something, whether it's a skateboard or a panel or a car, is a fairly short amount of time, pretty quick. All the time is spent in preparation. So if you don't like sanding things, this isn't the occupation for you, okay? There's a lot of sanding that goes along with any of the painting, as far as body work, preparation, getting ready for paint. It's a lot of sanding. It gets messy. But you gotta love it, okay? If you don't love doing this kind of stuff, it's not the type of job to get into, okay? You really got to enjoy the whole process to be able to do this for a career. All right, so adhesion and filling. So we know we're going to get a good adhesion. The wood is a good substrate for primer. It soaks in really nice. So the next thing we need to do is surface it and get it all prepped, both sides and the edges. As good as possible. Now this one I'm probably going to have to reprime because there's going to be some repairs in it. Okay, so I wanted to show you kind of how to get it ready, if you find any flaws, how to fix them, and then how to reprime it and get back on track. Okay, so it's not uncommon for you to have to reprime body work or anything twice. Okay, very common, and sometimes it's preferable just so that you know you do have a good straight finished product. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is typically you got to let the primer dry overnight. Okay, you can sometimes force it with some heat or put it out in the sun for a while. It's just best to let it sit overnight. That way all the solvents evaporate, the product cross-links or catalyzes and hardens up the way you want it to. If you try sanding it too soon, it's going to be gummy. It'll probably clog up the sandpaper or actually want to peel off, especially metals or plastics. So it's best just to be patient, let it dry up. Okay. So the first thing I want to do before I even start sanding is we're going to use guide coat, okay? Guide coat is just a flat black, a lacquer. It dries quickly. It doesn't gum up the sandpaper. And what it's there for is to show you what you need to do. Okay, this is going to be your guide to show you where you've sanded, where you haven't sanded, where you've gone too far, and where you haven't gone far enough, okay? Now, if you just start sanding this as it is in gray, it'll get sanded, right? But you're not going to know how far to go. You're not going to know where to stop. You're not going to know if you got all your scratches out of there. You're not going to know if you got all the little imperfections out, okay? You're just going blind because everything's going to turn gray. You won't know what you did until you actually paint it, and then you'll find all the flaws, okay? So if you're not using guide coat, you're doing it wrong, okay? And they have sprays, and they also have a powder. The powder is really nice. It gets a little messy sometimes, but it actually works a little bit better than spray because it gets into all the scratches a little bit deeper than the spray actually will. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to spray a light coat. Okay, now we're not trying to cover the whole thing with black. Okay, the more you put on, the more sanding you have to do, all right? If you put it on too light, you're not going to be able to see what you're doing, okay? So, just going to spray a little coat on there. Okay, you can see how it looks. I'll flip it over. Do not put it on heavy. And I want to make sure I get my edges also, okay? All right, that dries up fairly quickly, and then we'll be ready to start sanding, okay? Now, when I'm sanding, I typically will go through a couple different grits of sandpaper. You always want to start out coarse and go to fine, okay? Now, as we get closer to paint, the sandpaper gets finer and finer, okay? You don't want to sand anything with too coarse of a grit. Paint over it, you'll end up seeing a lot of sand scratches, okay? So what we typically do is break it down into 2 or 3 steps with gradually finer sandpaper. If we started out with a real fine sandpaper that we're going to finish with, typically it's not going to cut through the high spots. It'll just kind of roll over them, and it won't actually do any cutting, okay? So you want to make sure you're starting with something coarse enough to level it, to cut through all the high spots and bring it all down to the same level, okay? So on this board, we're going to be using 220. Okay, so I just pulled out a piece of 220, and this is a wet or dry sheets, so they can be sanded with water or dry. We're going to be doing a dry sand on the skateboards just because they're made out of wood. I don't want to introduce any water, which could cause the wood to swell up and damage the board. Okay, so we're going to do it all dry. You can do it wet as long as you're real careful about not busting through the primer into the wood. Otherwise, water is going to absorb. Okay, so 220 and then 320. So here's the 320, right? 320 sandpaper, and this is how the sheets come, right? So when I'm getting ready to, let me show you this. So there's those. Another way you can sand it. So these are just the wet and dry sheets. They come in sizes like that. These are also fine. These are the orbital papers. Okay, this one has holes in it. This is for a vacuum system, but it still works the same. So this is 220. Okay, this is a hook it. It's got the Velcro back. So 220 we're going to start with, and then we're going to finish off with 320. Okay, same grits, it's just in a different format. The other thing you can use is continuous roll. Here's some 220, right? So it's all the same grit. As long as the grit is the same, the paper is fine to use. It doesn't matter the size or the shape. You can use whichever, whatever's handy, okay? So like something like this, I can pull off a piece, and this is sticky back. Just fold it in half, and it's ready to go, okay? Now with something like these, I would typically just fold it in half and hold it and sand it, okay? Now with these, what you want to do is take them and you want to fold them. Okay, so we're taking it long ways and folding it in half this direction. Line up your corners. Crease it. This stuff's so brittle, it wants to fall apart, so now you have halves. Okay, same with the 320. Line up the corner. Crease it all the way across. This eliminates waste. Okay, so we have 2 pieces now, and what that allows us to do is to take a soft pad, and you can use different ones. This one is a pretty flexible one with holes in it. This one's a little bit stiffer, thicker, so whatever you want to use is fine. The deal is that we want to avoid using our hand too much bare. We want to have something in between the sandpaper and whatever we're sanding. What the purpose is your hand is not perfectly flat, so as you're sanding, your fingers are causing grooves in whatever you're sanding. So let's say you're doing a black car and you were sanding it. You left a bunch of grooves. When you go to paint it, you're going to see a bunch of little ripples in the paint job. We're trying to eliminate that. Okay. So what we want to use is a soft pad of some sort. Okay. We're going to start with the 220. So here's our 220. Put your soft pad. Wrap it around. Now you have three sides. So when one of them gets worn out, just flip it over to the next side and continue sanding. Okay. Now one thing to be aware of when you're dry sanding with the finer grits, your sandpaper is probably going to clog up quicker. So I usually have an air blower handy to blow out the dust from clogging up, or I'll hit it with something like a paint stick, or I'll take a little scuff pad and clean it off once in a while, and I'll show you that. Okay, so abrasives, something in between a soft pad or a block of some sort. Okay, doesn't matter the type of sandpaper as long as it's the right grit. Okay, and we're ready to start sanding. Okay. All right. So I pulled out a couple of Scotch-Brite pads. These are scuff pads or Scotch-Brite pads. This is what I was talking about for cleaning your sandpaper once in a while if it gets clogged up. Different shapes and sizes. This is a red Scotch-Brite. This is a coarse, pretty rough, so you want to be careful when you're scuffing things with this. This is a gray. This is in the shape of an orbital disc, right? So you can put it on a palm sander. This is a finer grit, okay, not as destructive as the red ones. Again, use it for whatever purpose it's for, and the more you use it, the more you'll understand where you can and where you cannot use these products. Okay, for right now, I'm just going to tear that one in half, and we'll see if I need to use it to clean my sandpaper out. The other thing is, if I'm dry sanding, there's going to be a lot of dust created, and I want to make sure I wear at least a paper mask, okay, to protect myself from the dust. If I was wet sanding, it's not necessary because there's no dust being created. You can wear gloves if you like. There's really no hazard at this point. It's just a dust hazard, an inhalation problem. So protect yourself however you would like to. And remember, safety is up to you. As an instructor, I can push it as much as I can, but it's really up to the individual to make the effort, right? Make the effort and be safe. So for this, I'll be using a paper mask. Okay, and what I'm doing, there's a system to sanding. Okay, you don't want to just kind of be willy-nilly about it. You want to have some kind of a pattern. So typically when sanding, you're keeping the pad flat up against the surface. Okay, I'm not using the edges, I'm not using the end. I want to keep it as flat as possible because I'm trying to get this as flat and smooth as possible. Okay, if I start digging in on the edges like this, I'm going to create low spots and dips. Okay, when I go to paint it, I'm going to see a low spot or a little valley in the paint job. So it's cheating. It might get the job done faster, but it's not going to look any better. It's going to look terrible. Okay, so you got to take some time, be patient, and put the time in and to make it right. Okay, so what I typically do when you're sanding is you can go in a straight line. It's fine as long as you follow up with a different direction. Otherwise, you'll end up with grooves in whatever you're sanding. Okay, so typically the pattern is an X pattern. So I would sand in one direction, and then I would switch it and sand in the opposite direction. Okay, and what this is doing is eliminating the chance for grooves to be made. Okay, and just from sanding a little bit like this, you can already see what the guide coat is showing us. Okay. So you can see anywhere that's staying, the light gray has been sanded, those are high spots. Anywhere where the black still is a low spot. Then we need to continue sanding flat until we get everything to be gray. Okay. Now let's say we were sanding and we got all the gray except for a spot that stayed black, but we were starting to hit wood or whatever our substrate is. That typically means that area might need to be filled up with some body filler and reprimed. And we'll see when we get to that if it needs it or not. Okay, we'll just start sanding. Put the mask on. So typically I'll just start and give everything a nice little sand just to knock off any of the little chunks of dirt or any little birds or something just to start getting it flattened out, and I can kind of see where I'm going with everything, right? Then I can start focusing on the areas that need help. The other thing to watch out for is your edges. You're naturally going to want to sand over your edge, and that's going to take your material off that you've already put on, and then the chances you might have to reprime. So on your edges, you don't want to sand over them. You want to sand up to them, not over, because I don't want to take that down to wood on the edges. Okay, I'm keeping the pad flat. And you can see the amount of dust coming off of that. All right. Now you can start focusing on an area and start finalizing it. And at this point, with this grit, again, we were using 220, I probably want to get about 80 to 90% of the black off. I can save the rest of the black for the next grit because I still need to save a little bit of primer on here because I'm going to sand it again, right? So I don't want to take it all off on the first try. Okay, so at this point, a lot of people will come up and say, okay, they're sanded, they've taken sandpaper to it, and it's all good. But if you look at it, you see all the black that's still there, right? It's not ready, right? There's still a lot of sanding to do. You got to be patient. So if you notice when I'm sanding, I'm going from one side to the other in a diagonal, right? And I just switched it up, so I'm going from side to side now on the other direction. So once you get an area that's pretty well done, there may be a couple little spots still on there. Stay away from that area and move to another section. You don't want to over sand something that's already ready, okay? This is when you really need to pay attention to what you're doing. Focus on what you're doing. Don't be distracted by other things around you. You want to pay attention to what your task is here. Okay, looking good. I'm just going to switch paper so you can see. All right, I'm just going to use the Orbital 220 just to show you how it works. So you can use the same pad. Just fold it over. Sometimes these are sticky back, so they stick well. Other times you have to kind of hold them on, right? Again, I'm keeping it flat. Standing out nice so you can start seeing all the black disappear. Now we are starting to hit some wood here. So, and I already know we're going to have to reprime this board anyway, so I'm not too worried about it. Because I know there will be some filling we have to do. And again, the temptation is, if you see a little low spot, right? If you see a little dark spot, the temptation is to dig it out, but you don't want to do that. That's kind of defeating the purpose. You want to keep it flat. Sand it evenly so everything around it comes down to meet that low spot, right? So I'm not sanding that dark spot, I'm sanding everything around it to bring it all to the same level. Okay. That one feels deep. You can see around it everything is looking really nice. So I'll probably end up putting a little bit of filler in there, because I know I'll end up hitting wood before that's completely gone. This was probably the waviest board we had. I just wanted to grab it so I can show you what would happen if everything didn't come out as perfect as you thought the first time. You always have to be ready. Be prepared for the unexpected. You thought you were going to be painting, but you might have to reprime it instead. All right, no big deal. So as you can see, we got most everything off on that end. A couple little spots. Those will fill up with more primer. I'm going to fill that up. Like I said, you don't have to worry about getting all the black off the first time, because you will be following it up with a finer grit. And on this one, we'll be re-priming it anyway, so that's not a huge deal. All right, looking decent. Come over here, finish up this corner. As you can see, it's messy, it's dusty, it's getting a little hot out today. You will be sweating. This is a physical, dirty job. It's not for everyone. If you enjoy using your hands, you enjoy creating, you enjoy seeing a finished product, you might be all right. But if you're just looking to get something painted real quick, you're not into all the sanding and preparation, this might not be the job for you. So again, I'm not digging them out. I'm just trying to sand everything evenly to bring the primer surface down to meet the low spots. Probably need a little putty on that one. Right. So this is where we're left off on the underside. Okay. So we've got a couple little spots that we'll come back and fix with a little putty. I'm going to continue sanding the edges and the top side, same deal. Okay. Now with the sides, you don't really need a pad. You can use it if you want. But what you're going to do is just kind of wrap it around. So I'm just wrapping my fingers around because it's got a little bit of a curve to it. And the same thing, you're trying to get rid of that black. Sides are looking decent. Okay, so my edges are good. All that's left is the top side. We'll come back to that. All right, so we've got it sanded pretty well. Like I said, there's still going to be a little bit of black left on there. Not a big deal, but the deep ones are the ones we're going to come back and start filling. Okay, and you can see, lighting's not the best right here, but you can see where there's still some black marks and there's wood showing through right next to it. That means we can't really go any further without making a hole, right? So anywhere where it's already busting through to the substrate, you want to go ahead and fill these, right? We'll fill these up with some putty. I think there's a couple on this side, one here. Not too bad. I think there's that one. So I'm going to show you how to fill those up, sand them, and get them ready for a reprime. Now, if this didn't have any flaws in it, like it is here, we could re-guide coat it with the black and then go to the next grit, which would be 320, and just go to the finer grit. But since we got to reprime it, we'll stop here, fix our problems, and then come back and reprime, and then start the process over again with the 220 and then go to 320. Okay, so coming out pretty good though. I'm going to make sure all your edges and everything are good. It's looking all right though. All right, be back.